Hello everyone, greetings from PayTabs team and welcome to Managing Merchants Dashboard tutorial series. In this series, we are going to take you on a journey to learn and discover the power of our merchant dashboard. Throughout the series, we will walk you through each of the menus and options found on PayTabs merchant dashboard and how you can easily manage it. So, let's get started. In this video, we are going to move to the next part of the transaction panel and learn about how we can manage our transaction inside PayTabs Merchant Dashboard. So let's get started. Before we start, please note that we have a fully dedicated solution article that can get you to know more about the transaction menu inside PayTabs support portal under the name Get to Know the Transaction Menu item and how to manage it. So if you're ever looking for a referral or document to learn more about the transaction menu, this is the article that you should get headed to. Now we can move back to our merchant dashboard and learn more about the transaction menu and how we can manage our transaction inside PayTabs merchant dashboard. The first thing you should know is where we can find our transactions and manage it. There are two places that you can find your transactions or your latest transaction inside your dashboard. Your homepage over here, of course, and by navigating to the transaction panel from the left menu over here. Now, once you navigate to the transaction menu, we will walk you through this first part of the transaction menu, which is the main page of the transactions. As you can see here, you will be seeing the table of the recent transactions and the search button for search for your transaction over here. And we are going to get to the search button in just a moment, but now we want to learn more about the transaction view itself. So starting with the transaction panel over here, or the transaction recent table, you can see here the first thing will be the transaction reference, and this transaction reference is PayTabs transaction reference. And this is very important to know, as we are going to learn more about there is a reference related to the customer bank or issuer bank and reference to the acquirer bank. But for now, the main reference that we have here is the PayTabs transaction reference that starts with PT or TS, and here you can find this transaction reference. The second thing, or the second column, will contain the customer name, which is the cardholder name or the customer name who paid the transaction or who paid the payment inside the transaction. After that, you have the type, which is the transaction type, and we are going to learn more about the different transaction types supported by PayTabs in a moment. And after that, you will have the payment method that this payment was initiated with. So here, for example, you can see Visa. There are another payment method like, for example, MasterCards, Apple Pay. Whatever the payment method used in this transaction, you will find it over here. Next thing will be the currency, the amount, and the date and time of the transaction. And finally, here comes the status. This is the status where you can find out if this transaction was authorized. So it will have the A button like that, and it will be a green transaction, or if it's declined, rejected, or cancelled, for example. And we are going to learn about also these transaction status and codes in just a second. So now that we have learned about the main view of the transaction panel, we can learn more about the transaction view itself, which contain all the transaction details. In order to do that, you are going to click on any transaction like that, and once you click on it, you will see the transaction view and you will see all the transaction details. So let's get started with the transaction details itself. Starting from the head part over here, you will have the status of the transaction, whether it was authorized or not authorized, maybe it's successful or not successful. So here you can see it's authorized, of course, if it's a decline or an error for some reason. So this transaction will not be authorized, will be not authorized. The second thing will be the transaction type, and we will see in a moment what is the transaction type, the different transaction types supported by PayTabs, and then we will see that PayTabs transaction reference over here, and finally we will see the IPN logs button. And after we finish out this view, we are going to learn more about the IPN logs button over here. Now let's move to the next part of the transaction view, which is the, let's say, the main details of the transaction. So here you will be able to see the profile details of you. So this will be your profile ID and your profile name, and then you'll start to see the basic details of the transaction, like the date and time of the transaction. This is a very basic information. The amount, which here will have the amount and the currency of the transaction. Then the status, and if you want to learn more about the different status supported by PayTabs and different codes, we have a fully dedicated solution article called What is Response Code versus Response Status, and we will get to learn more about it in a second also. But let's finish out the transaction view again, and after the status we will have the authorization code, and this authorization code is basically the transaction reference inside the issuer site. So whenever your customer is wanting or is requesting to refer to his bank, the customer bank, and he need to know the reference or the transaction reference that does exist inside his issuer bank, here comes the authorization code. So this authorization code is the transaction reference coming from the issuer bank side. So after that, you will have the card ID and the card description. Basically, the card ID and card description are fulfilled from your side, from the merchant side. So you are submitting these details and you are going to find it over here. After the first section over here, the basic detail, we will find here 3 or 4 different sections, which are the payment methods, the authentication, the customer details, and notes. So starting with the payment methods. The payment method here, from its name, represents the payment method details and the response details coming from the acquirer side. This is a simple idea or a simple details about the payment method that was initiated or used during this transaction. So the first thing you are going to see here is the channel, and the channel here meaning where did the customer pay or open this payment page. So for example, this was paid through Paylinks. Sometimes if you have initiated the payment through our APIs, then you will see here transaction APIs. If you are using one of our plugins, for example, you will see here the plugin name. If you are using one of our SDK, you'll be seeing the SDK name. For example, if you are using one of our invoices, you will see here the invoice. So basically, this is the channel that uses, or this is the channel that the customer entered to pay or finalize this transaction. The next thing will be the payment method, as clarified here. As you can see, it's Visa. So of course you will see here the payment method, and you know we have different payment methods supported by PayTabs so far, and we have clarified this inside the profile menu video. But just to be clear, this part is to show you where the payment method, if you want to learn how the customer did pay this payment or did finalize this payment, this is the part where you are going to refer to here inside the method. The next thing will be the description, and the description here will contain the customer card. So whenever a customer is buying using his card or his debit card or credit card, you will find the basic details about or the initial numbers of the customer card over here. This is very useful for you, so you can search by this button. By clicking this button, you are going to view all the transaction that was done using this card. So of course it will have a certain range, but you can see the recent transaction that was done using this card. So if you are looking, for example, if a certain customer did pay, how many times did a certain customer pay you amount, so here is a way to do that. Now let's get back to our transaction view and continue the details. The next thing, of course, will be the expiry date of this card. As you can see, we have here the basic details about the card, the initial number, the expiry details, and the next 2 points also is related to the customer card or issuing bank. Here you'll see the issuer country of the bank, where was the country that this customer is buying from, and the issuer name, which is the customer card or the customer bank name. You will find it here over here. And finally, the RRN, which is one of the most important reference for the transaction. The RRN is the transaction reference inside the acquirer bank, your bank, the merchant bank. So again, to sum this up, the first one, PT2 transaction, this is PayTabs transaction reference. Whenever you are communicating with PayTabs regarding any transaction, this is the transaction reference you are using. So the authorization code is the issuer bank reference. So whenever you are using or communicating, or your customer is communicating with his bank, your customer bank, this is the reference that you should look for. And finally, if you are looking for something inside your, let's say, your bank, your merchant bank, the acquirer bank, the RRN are the transaction reference that you should be using. Now that we have learned more about the payment method section, we can move to the authentication section. The authentication section is simply the 3DS secure details for this card and this payment. So basically these are some details that was retrieved from the acquirer side or from the scheme side about the authentication, and here where you can know that this card was fully authenticated or not. Simply you can know that by simple details like the 3DS version that we clarified inside, or in the previous video we have clarified to you that there are about the 3DS and the 3DS1, 3DS2, the different. So here you can see that this card is using the latest 3DS version, 3DS2, and you can see that it's enrolled inside 3DS. Sometimes or some cards get declined because it's not enrolled inside the 3DS mode or the version is very old. So you can check that and learn about the 3DS version of if this card is enrolled inside the 3DS mode or not inside this section. And of course you have the response status of the 3DS, which is authenticated successfully. And one of the most important points inside this is the ACI value. So the ACI value is the response coming from the acquirer or the scheme side that says how well this was authenticated, and mainly if it was 05 or 02. So of course 05 here for Visa and 02 for MasterCard. This means that this is fully authenticated from our side. If this payment has any issue in this case and its ACI is 05 or 02, then the customer should refer to his issuing bank. Now that we have learned about the authentication level, we can move on to the next part, which is the customer details. From its name, it's the basic customer details, either provided by you or by the customer inside the transaction. You will find all of them here. And the final thing will be the notes section. The notes section is basically where if there are anything or any options happened in this transaction, like a certain refund, a certain void, an IBN failed, you will find any note that you need to take care of inside this transaction. So now that we have learned the basic view about the transaction, there's one more thing that you should know, which is the transaction follow-up or the follow-up transactions. In order to learn the follow-up transactions, we need to learn more about the transaction types, and this will lead us to the transaction type solution article. What is transaction types? So basically there are different transaction types supported by PayTabs, like the sale, auth, and capture, void, register, refund. So we can have an idea about them inside this solution article. So for example, the sale transaction type means that the amount of the transaction will be deducted directly from the customer bank account once he submits the purchase. As for the auth transaction types, this means that the amount of the purchase, of course you need to know something. You are the one who is deciding which transaction type. So when you are initiating a new payment, you will be deciding inside the payment what type you want to initiate, whether it's sale, auth, capture, or else. So now that we have learned about the sale, we can learn about the auth transaction types. Again, it means that the purchase will be deducted, or the amount will be deducted from the cardholder bank account. Yet, it will be held, which means authorized, for a certain period of time inside the customer bank itself, the issuer bank. This amount will remain inside the cardholder bank until it gets captured. Okay, what we mean by capture here, it will be transferred from the bank account, from the customer bank account to your bank account until it be captured or it be voided. Voided means released back to the customer from the customer bank account to, or from the customer bank to the customer bank account. So this is an idea about the auth, capture, and void. So sometimes you can immediately initiate a sale transaction type. This means that this transaction type, the amount will be deducted directly from the customer side to your side. However, you can authorize an amount, hold it inside the customer bank until you decide you want to capture it, transfer it to your side, or void it, return it back to the customer. Another part or another type of transaction is the register. The register may be or simply mean that you can verify a card for later, so making POS, auth, and cap together. Okay, So simply the register transaction is a compound of the auth and the capture transaction together. And again, or finally, the refund transaction means that, or simply from its name, it means that you are going to return the amount you already deducted from the customer from your side to his side, which is a very important thing. You cannot, for example, let's say we cannot refund an auth transaction. Why? Because this amount is not yet transferred to your side. If there is an auth transaction, you can only void it or capture it. And what is the transaction we can refund? We can only refund, let's say, a sale transaction or a capture transaction where the amount has been officially moved or transferred to your side. So here we have learned or got an idea about the different transaction types supported by PayTabs, and this lead us or get us back to here our transactions where we can see the type over here. I can show you another type, for example. Let's move to another profile over here. And inside the transaction, you can see here I have different types. I have the sale transaction, the auth transaction, and here we can try out to refund the transaction. As we clarified before, we can only refund a sale transaction or a captured transaction. So for example, if you want to refund a transaction using your merchant dashboard, you can navigate over here to the transaction. Then over down here, you will find a refund button. Just click on it. Simply by doing that, you will see here that you are refunding this amount or this transaction. How can you do that, or what can you do in here? You can specify a certain amount to refund. For example, you have here the minimum amount to refund and the maximum amount to refund. This is basically called the full refund or the partial refund. So if you want to do a partial refund, like you don't want to refund the whole transaction, you can specify the exact amount over here, like say 50, and just click on submit. Once we click on submit, you can see that this account, this transaction will be refunded to your customer successfully. Let's reload it like that so we can see the refund transaction over here. As you can see, there has been a new transaction. Its type is refund. Once we click over here like that, we can see the previous transaction, the previous sale transaction, and we can see that this refund was only for 50 amount or 50 amount bound. So another thing, now that we have learned how we can refund through our merchant dashboard, we can learn the next thing, which is voiding and capturing a transaction. How we can capture an authorized transaction and how we can void an authorized transaction. So let's start by capturing an authorized transaction. How we can capture an authorized transaction inside PayTabs merchant dashboard. Simply navigate to any auth type transaction, click on it like this, and you will see over here inside the payment method, this is not authorized. Of course, we can't capture it. I need to click on an authorized one like this. Click on it simply, and you will see here two buttons. The capture button is for capturing the amount and transferring to your side, and the release button or the void button, this for releasing the amount from the customer bank back to his account. So first let's try the capture. You're going to click on capture like that, and again you can do a full capture or a partial capture. Here I'm going to do a full partial to test the difference between full and partial, and I'm going to capture the full amount like that, then click on submit. Once I click on submit, you will see that this transaction was successful. Let's reload our transaction like that, and you will see that there is a new type transaction, capture type transaction, and the amount was captured successfully. And if you came back over here, you will see the previous transaction. This is the auth transaction that we captured, and this is the capture transaction that we already captured over here. And you will see here the channel which we have captured in the dashboard, and we have done that, or who is the user who done that. Now that we have learned about the capture, we can learn about the void. The void is releasing the amount back to the customer from his account or from his bank to his bank account. So basically, we are just want to make sure that we are releasing an authorized transaction, and this authorized transaction was not captured. So here, this is the transaction that we did capture, the one that ends with 89, this one. So we are going to release this one. We have captured this one, we are going to release this one. Okay, simply you are going to click on release, and again choose the amount that you want to release it, the same as the capture and the same as the refund. You can click any amount. I'm going to do a partial release by clicking on only 50. Submitted like that, the amount was voided back to the customer successfully. And a very important thing here, one of the powerful things that you can use is you can authorize a transaction, meaning initiating a transaction of the type auth, then deducting or capturing a certain amount and releasing a certain amount. Like for now, we have released like 50 USD dollars. So the original transaction was $100. This means we can still capture the other 50 amount, the 50 USD dollar. So simply you can come over here. As you can see, you have here inside the notes, the release, that what happening inside this transaction. So we can come here and capture the other 50 like this, or maybe capture only 30 of them, any amount applicable. As you can see here, you can also see the minimum and the maximum. I will only capture 30 USD dollar and submit, and as you can see that the transaction was successful. This is an idea about how we can capture an authorized transaction, how we can void an authorized transaction, and also how we can refund a transaction, an authorized transaction. Now, the next thing we want to learn more about after the transaction types and how we can do follow-up transactions like refund, void, and capture, what we want to learn more about now is the transaction response status and response code. You can see over here inside any transaction, you will find a response status that looks like this. This response status simplify or clarify to you what happened inside this transaction. So for example, if it's a successful transaction, you will see authorized, but for other transaction like this one, this is a decline transaction, so you will see that the other decline transaction was D, and you can see over here that the response code here is the issue that happened. This response code is the one that you can use to investigate the case. You can look it up inside our support, inside our support portal, PayTabs support portal, or you can share it with PayTabs customer care. Now, if you want to learn more about the response status and the response code, you can check out our solution article, What is Response Cases versus Response Code, or What is Response Code versus Response Status, to learn the differences between them. And here inside this solution article, you will find the different codes or statuses, and each one have its own dedicated solution article. So whenever you face an issue or decline, don't worry, just revert to this solution article and check all of these details, and you will find all the details needed. Now, the final thing, or the final two things we want to learn about, are how or what is the IPN logs inside the transaction view. The IPN logs is simply, you can check, we have a fully dedicated solution article about IPNs and how we can configure an IPN. What we just want to learn in this video is this simple button over here called IPN logs. This simple button over here, which is called IPN logs, contain all the IPN that was triggered containing this transaction details and the result for it. So if you are looking to view if any IPN or any transaction details was sent to you or not, you can simply check this solution article, this result, of course. You can check, this result. Here, if it's successful, you will see that there was an IPN sent to this domain or this endpoint by you. It was sent by this format at this date, and it's sent successfully. However, if it was failed for any reason, like this one, for example, you will find it. Let's try the older one. You will find inside the IPN logs the failed reason. So for example, this URL is not found. So you can see here it's not found. This URL skipped because there is a callback. Though this means we skipped this URL. Simply what we want you to know is here you will find all the IPN logs for your IPN. And a very important thing that you can do in this view is if you have, for example, you are configuring one of your domain and there is an issue with the domain. So now you fix the issue and you want to resend this transaction details again, or maybe resend it to your plugin again. So simply click on this button over here to resend the IPN again, and all these IPNs will be sent again to all the targeted, and you will see the new account, or the new over here, the new result of the new IPN sent. So now that we have learned about the IPNs, and again you can check the IPN video clarified in the description of this video, the last thing we want to learn about is searching and exporting the transaction reports. So first, if you are looking to search for any amount of transaction or exporting any amount of transactions, this is very easy to be done through the merchant dashboard. Just click on the search button over here. Once you click on the search button, you will see that there are two types of search. The quick search here, where you can provide a cart ID, an email, a phone, transaction reference, an auth code, a service reference, or an RAN. So our RRN here, or a cart ID, or any details, once you click any one of those, like for example here, I could say my email like that. And search if there are any payment that's done with this email, for example, and you will see no transaction found. So as you can see, yes, I didn't provide the email. I can search like that. Let's search if I have any transaction with this email, just to make sure. Customer details. Yes, this email, sorry. So we can take this email and get back to the search and click the quick search and click on email and paste that transaction, the email over here. And once we click on search, you will see all the transactions that you have with this email. This is a way of searching, which is using the quick search, and the quick search can be done using the cart ID, the email, the phone, the transaction reference, the authorization code, the service reference, and the RRN. The next thing we want to do, or the next thing you want to check, is the advanced search. The advanced search have multiple varieties and can be ranged in a certain date, but you need to make sure that the range does not overwhelm than 45 days. So you need to make sure that the start and the end does not make more than 45 days. Now you can see all types of details that you can search with, like the title, the transaction reference, the authorization code, the service reference, the RRN, the cart ID, the email, the phone, the status, the type, the class, the amount, the anything. So for example here, let's search for any transaction that has the email that we have just pasted like that, and let's choose any different range we want, but make sure that the range does not exceed 45 days. And once we click on search, you will see here all the transaction with this details. But the most important thing here is the exporting. You can export all of these transaction details using the buttons sent over here. You can export it as an XCLS, and you are exported as a CSV, and here is an option to filter it if you want to filter by certain filter, like you want the authorized only, or filtered by cart ID or email. So this is the way to export transaction. Simply click, for example, on export as CSV like that, and here you will be exported and downloaded directly. And if I open it like that, you will be able to see all the transaction details. But an important thing that you need to know here, as you can see, I don't have all the transaction details over here. Why is that? Because this is called the export layout. The export layout is the place where you can, or the layout where you can modify the columns that you wanted to be displayed. So this, of course, fully described inside the reports video, which will you found inside the description of this video. But simply, if you navigate it over here to the reports, and then you come to the settings button over here, then over here you will find the export layout. The export layout is the layout that any report inside the transaction will be exported in. What you need to do, or what you need to do before anything, is to check your layout like that. And here you will find all the layout. And for example, I want to use this layout, or maybe I want to add a new layout. All of this is clarified inside the reports video. I'm just showing you how we can modify the reports of the transaction. And here I'm going to add all the columns. Here, this is the available columns, and this is the selected column that you want it to be displayed inside your report. I'm going to update it. I'm going to get back to my transactions. I'm going to do another transaction search like that. First this, I'm going to use my email again like this. Click on search. You will see this result. I'm going to export it as a CSV again. And once I export it, let's open it up like that. I'm going to open it up. And once I open, you'll be able to see that all the details was found in this transaction report. So this was how we can export any report from the transaction. And if you want to learn more about the exporting of the reports, you can check our reports video, and we have a fully dedicated solution article called How to Export Transaction Reports from PayTabs Dashboard. And also for the refund, we have How to Refund. You can find all the details you want. The final thing I want to mention is that whenever you are initiating an invoice, this is clarified inside the invoice video, that whenever you are initiating an invoice like this one, for example, here let's check for any paid invoice, for example. There are no paid invoice. Okay, I can pay anyone, just to show you how the transaction of an invoice look inside the transactions. I'm going to pay this one. Okay. 203. Okay, just showing you the final thing over here. The same as billing. I'm going to agree. I'm going to buy it now. Now, why did I do that? Just to show you that inside, once you pay any invoice, inside the transaction over here, you can find the invoice ID like that, and you will be able to find the channel here to be invoice. So this is just an optional thing. The final thing I want you to know, of course, if a transaction have a shipping details, you will be able to find it over here and the customer details over here. This is basically everything about the transaction panel and how you can manage your transaction throughout your merchant dashboard. And now we can move to the next part.